Hello and welcome to the Arthur B. Mauro Institute for Peace and Justice at St. Paul's College at the University of Manitoba. My name is Jason Brennan, the manager of the Mauro Institute, and I welcome you to today's lecture. Both the folks that are joined us in the room, and I think there's about 30 or 40 people online, so we welcome you all. I'd like to begin by saying that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. We dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you for attending today. This is the first of our fall term brown bag lectures. Please visit our website to see descriptions and find registration links and recordings for future lectures, and also find links to video recordings of past lectures as well. Today's lecture is taking place both in person and online, as I mentioned, and the lecture is being recorded for future broadcast. Today's lecture, the lecture will include about a 30-minute or 35-minute presentation from our guest, followed by a question and answer session. If you're online, we ask you to type your questions into the Q&A box, and then I will be operating in the background. And if you'd like, you can bring voice to your question. I'll turn on your microphone and you can ask your question, but please start by typing your question into the Q&A box. A little special today, after our Q&A session finishes, we will be shutting down the online portion, and then we'll just have an in-room, in-camera discussion with the students and our special guest. I'd also especially like to thank our partners, Development and Peace, Caritas Canada, and their animator, Jason Segal, for collaborating to bring our distinguished visitor to Canada. I haven't mentioned his name yet because I'm going to allow a student to introduce our special guest. And I'll just tell you a quick story. My job at the Mauro Institute gives me the privilege of welcoming students from all over Canada and around the world into the Peace and Conflict Studies programs. And sometime in August, I had 3 new students sitting in front of me, and one of them was the student I'll introduce now. And I was telling them about what we do at the Mauro Institute. We bring visitors from around the world, and we bring their knowledge, and you're able to meet them. And I was starting to describe this fellow from Nigeria, who was many years an advocate for environmental causes, and we were excited to have him join us. And as I was saying this student, who I will introduce in a minute, her eyes were getting a little bigger and a little bigger. And she said, "Are you talking about Nnimmo Bassey?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And so she was more than a little bit excited that she had come all the way to Canada to study Peace and Conflict Studies, only to meet someone she admires greatly. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Amadi, who comes from Nigeria to study here in Canada, who will introduce our guest today. Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Jackson. Good morning, everyone. And I am here very privileged to introduce Nnimmo Bassey. But first off, I met him first in 2019 in my former university, University of Port Harcourt, Nigeria, during the International Peace Day. And one thing got me thinking, because he left a couple of magazines. When I flip, I was like, wow, when can I write this much? That was what came to my mind. Then secondly, in 2021, he became an honorary member of my Rotary Club of Port Harcourt ECHO. And when I heard that he was coming here, I was beyond happy, and I couldn't but tell my Rotary Club, Mr. Nnimmo is coming to my school. So with this, I would like to introduce him today. He is a recipient of an honorary doctorate degree from York University in 2023 and the Rafto Human Rights Award in 2012. The Mauro Institute is pleased, we are so pleased to welcome you, sir, being the director of HOMEF, Home of Mother Earth Foundation, as part of the Development and Peace Solidarity visit to Canada. Mr. Bassey was just awarded the Wellenberg Award, which is in University of Michigan, which is given to those who have showed exceptionality in their work and rooted in selflessness, meaning he does the work he has been doing, without expecting any award from anyone. And he has been doing that to this day. Mr. Bassey is an architect, writer, and director of HOMEF based in Nigeria, and a member of the steering committee of Oilwatch International, a network and member of the expansion of forces extraction in the global south. In 2011, Mr. Bassey founded the ecological think tank, the health of Mother Earth Foundation, promoting environmental, climate justice, and food sovereignty and in Nigeria and Africa. HOMEF is ecological minded, rooted in ideology of living in harmony with nature and environment. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to welcome Mr. Bassey to the stage.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm not talking at all. Good morning.
Good morning.
It must be very silent. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's a big privilege to have this conversation today. We're looking at profit over people. We know that this is what is driving the world crazy at the moment. Because those who have power are mostly concerned just with profit. Little care about other humans, other beings, and with the environment itself. I'm here on the invitation of Peace, Development and Peace Canada, which is a member of Caritas International. We are partners, and there's a project we're doing together in Nigeria in two communities. I will talk a bit about that in the course of this presentation. I do believe that the best way for us to, well, I'm very eager to move from this first slide, but I think I can't afford to move without saying something about what you're seeing there. What you're seeing there is the very first commercial oil well drilled in Nigeria in 1956. It was abandoned in the 1970s. Recently, I visited this oil well, visited this oil well number 1, I visited number 2, number 3, number 6, number 9, and number 12. And why I did the visit was to see what happens after you abandon an oil well without decommissioning. So these wells are not decommissioned. And so all of them are still leaking oil and contaminating the environment. They were abandoned in the 70s. They're not producing, but they're still active in terms of pollution. And so just leaving an oil well without taking care of it, without decommissioning it, dismantling it, and sealing it up, is not the end of the story. Around the world, oil companies have left many wells like this that are not decommissioned, and they're all sitting time bombs across the world. Maybe not in the global north, maybe I could say across the global south, because they're a bit more careful about what they do in the north than what happens in the south. So this well has been designated a monument by the government of Nigeria. And it's very interesting that it's called a monument because it's a monument to disaster, a monument to what happens when you move on the extractivist pathways of economic development or economic deriving revenue from the economy, from extractivism. And so I will move on. One of the very important points that I always discuss with my colleagues and partners is this from this quote by Thomas Sankara, who was a revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, assassinated by his friends, and the country has not really recovered. He said you can fight effectively only against things that you understand well, and you can't win unless you are convinced your fight is just. This is so critical. And we remind ourselves of this all the time, that we have to know what we are campaigning against, and we have to be convinced that it is right to campaign against it. And a lot can be said about this, one of which is that if you are an advocate for environmental justice, people are always going to ask you, what are your alternatives? Because, the world is so enamored to extractivism. Extractivism is colonial because it's often not extraction is hardly in favor of those who own the territory where the action is taking place. So colonialism was based on extractivism. You extract from one region and you take it to the metropole, to somewhere else for the benefit. And you ensure that those who live in this territory don't do anything to disrupt that cycle of extraction, but do things that will feed the system. That's why you had like cash cropping, which has become a big idea for politicians who want to invest in industrial agriculture, want to do plantations. You know, plantations also have roots not beyond, before colonialism, plantation agriculture had taken place and drove slavery. And so plantation, cash cropping, extractivism is all one big line of devastation. And you know, all this has happened because humans, the predominant mindset is that we can dominate nature. When a person has that mindset, it means you say you can dominate yourself because we are part of nature. And if you dominate yourself, it means there's something the matter. You are not at peace with yourself. And so we are continuously at war with ourselves and with Mother Earth. And this is one of the roots of the problem. Kwame Nkrumah was the first prime minister of post-colonial Ghana. And he said, among other things, that the worst form of imperialism is exploitation without responsibility. And you know, if you look around today and ask yourself, what is going on in the world today? Whether it's about leaving dirty energy to green energy, the basis of this is still extractivist. And that's why you're having crisis in Congo DR, DRC, and other places where so-called critical minerals are being extracted, lithium, cobalt, and the rest, for making electric batteries and electric cars and all kinds of computers and other things, and for moving from, supposedly, from dirty energy to clean energy. But what is the basis of that transition? And we believe that to really have a transition, it must be post-extractivist. A transition that would work with justice and fairness must be post-extractivist. So this is a picture from a community called Ikarama in a state in the Niger Delta of Nigeria. It's one of the most contaminated communities. Recently, it just happened that whenever the young people want to build a fish pond and they start excavating, what they get is not clean water, but crude oil. Because over the years of oil spills in the territory, rather than clean up, the oil companies barely turn the soil, but they import soil to cover up the spill. So when you dig the soil, what you get is oil coming out. And so you can have a water body completely polluted, as you can see in that photograph. In last year, the state issued a report from the Bayelsa Oil and Environment Commission titled Environmental Genocide. You can Google for it, and I recommend that you read it, Environmental Genocide. And it showed that there's a per capita contamination in that territory of 1.5 barrels of crude oil. So in other words, if you're from that place, you have 1.5 barrels of crude oil poured over your head. But that's democratically shared to everyone, babies and old people. And recently also, a society organization conducted health audits of women in the territory where the first oil wells were drilled. And the outcome showed that they took blood sample from 83 women, and every one of them had hydrocarbon in their blood. So I told my friends from that territory, look, you all are so inflammable, shouldn't be near any naked fire because you have hydrocarbon in your blood, so be careful where you go. So there are so many consequences of extractivism. So many consequences when people think of profit and not the environment or the people. And one interesting thing is that the kind of pollution that follows extractivism is not just about, I talk a lot about oil and gas because that's my reality where I come from. But whether it's gold, diamond, cobalt, whatever it is, whatever is being mined, the impacts are horrible because often there's no form of accountability or responsibility. Even when corporations engage in what they call corporate social responsibility, it's actually corporate social irresponsibility, because you cannot poison me and then build me a clinic. Doesn't make sense. Doesn't add up. You're poisoning me continuously, and yet you're giving me a clinic and a doctor to take care of me. What kind of nonsense is that? And so there are so many impacts for both any kind of extractivism, any kind of resource extraction in a way that is not, that does not respect the environment or the people, is actually the implications are enormous and usually negative. So soils are contaminated, water is contaminated, the air, of course, and there's fire everywhere when they try to cover up their tracks. And I thought I should show this is gas flaring. Many people have not really seen or can't imagine what it means to flare gas. This is gas associated with crude oil extraction, because in some fields, when oil is extracted, it comes out with produced water, gas, and the oil itself. So at the flow station, the three are separated. The produced water, some of which are radioactive, are put in ponds and treated before that released into the environment. The gas could be collected and processed for use as natural gas, for cooking, for industrial purpose, for electricity generation, or it could just be set on fire. And the oil companies in Nigeria, operating in Nigeria, began to flare gas from the 1950s. In the early 60s, the colonial office in Britain actually confronted Shell that what they're doing is not acceptable, and the people would ask them to account for it. The day came when communities began to campaign against this, and we had a litigation against Shell working with the community in 2005, and the judge found them guilty of flaring, that this is against the right to life, and it's against the Constitution of Nigeria, and that they should stop. But as we speak, the flaring is still going on. They've not stopped it. And Shell's explanation in the 1960s was that when they started oil extraction in Nigeria, there was no commercial market for gas. And so setting it on fire became the natural or normal industry practice. But if that was in the 60s, we are talking about today is 2024. They're still flaring gas, and there's a market for it. But they're flaring gas because it's cheaper for them to flare the gas. While this gas causes a lot of cancers, skin diseases, it causes bronchitis, asthma, all kinds of breathing diseases, and the oxides and the nitrous and sulfur oxides in the gas, when it mixes with moisture in the atmosphere, comes down as acid rain, which is extremely destructive of infrastructure as well as crops and other things. And so one summary, one point, one conclusion I can draw at this point is that extractivism promotes extreme pollution, or what could be called ecocide, and is actually a tool for privatization. Because when my river is contaminated completely, I can't fish there, I can't drink the water, I can't even swim in it, it means that you've privatized and taken my river as your sewage channel. And that's what has happened in many, many places. In Obuasi, if you visit Ghana, Obuasi has the biggest underground gold mine in that country, maybe one of the biggest on the continent of Africa. And the kind of toxic, the poisoning that's come from that mine to the communities, the arsenic going to the acidic things going to the streams, have forced communities to relocate continuously. Even until recent time, communities are still moving. It's almost like a ghost town. That was a thriving town when gold first arrived. If you go to South Africa, some coal mines in the Witbank area, they have underground fire, they've been burning for decades. Just burning underground. As if you walk on the surface, you could just fall into a sinkhole. And so extraction benefits politicians, and the system benefits extractive companies, but the benefit for people is very doubtful. I know we say the benefit, well, gold, you can have gold necklaces and stuff for decoration, but the world is still mining for more gold. I don't think we need more gold. And that is why we believe that we should all say yes to life and no to needless mining. So having said that, they can find a conclusion from this slide about the fact that I don't need to emphasize that extractivism disrupts so many things in communities, destroys cultures, destroys including the music, the poetry, the song, the dance, because it turns people's minds upside down. And of course, that means it destroys the culture and the spirituality, because everything changes. When you've lost everything, you even lose your mind. You may not realize it, but you lose your mind. And so mining is destructive and negates our human rights. I've already said it. It's colonial, neo-colonial, neoliberal, destructive, and it just has a lot of horrible, horrible things. And again, we always take a pause to emphasize, to remind ourselves that the environment is our life. We are part of nature, we are not apart from it. And anything that does not respect the people or the environment has serious implications. I've talked about these extractivist crime scenes across Africa. In Nigeria, there's Oilwatch gold, Marikana. Remember Marikana? There was some years back, Marikana is in South Africa, when the mining platinum there, and the miners were asking for better life wages, better working conditions, and the police went there and a lot of people lost their lives. I've had the misfortune of visiting places not to look at beautiful environment, but to look at pollution. And that led me to write this book, To Cook a Continent. If you can get a copy, I think it's it's one book I like to refer to myself, even though I wrote it. All right, are we still together?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to show. All right, this photograph was taken. You can see the date. It's marked 26th of September. That's just about a week ago. And that's one of my colleagues. Unfortunately, he wasn't prepared for what he saw, so he didn't have protective equipment. You can see he's standing in a crude oil-covered water body on barefoot. He was taking samples for laboratory examination. It's one of the communities that we're working on with development and peace. And what we're looking at there is that how pollution has led to land grabbing as a privatization, because when your land is contaminated to this level, it doesn't belong to you anymore. You can't do anything with it. You can't live off it, you can't enjoy it. And so, and this is what is driving global warming. Global warming has two ends of a pipeline. One end is where the fossil fuel is extracted. The other end is where consumption releases carbon into the atmosphere. All the negotiations and the conversation debates on climate change is about the carbon molecules in the atmosphere. You hardly hear about what is happening at the other end of the pipeline, where oil, coal, and gas is being extracted. And then the impact of global warming is suffered by those who live in this kind of territory, this kind of place. This photo was taken at Etoy in Ogoni in Rivers State. And Ogoni is very symbolic in terms of environmental justice campaigns. I don't need to remind you, but it's important to say, to remind ourselves, coastal erosion in a place like Nigeria is one major consequence of global warming. And you have to trace it back to the extractive activities of the oil companies, where they're the ones who are bringing out the carbon, and the carbon in the atmosphere is causing the global warming, which is beyond warming, actually. Deforestation of mangrove forests. Mangrove forests are the best shoreline defenses. They're also spawning ground for fishes. They kind of provide and support local economies, especially for women who harvest seafoods from the mangrove forest. And so when you destroy the mangrove forest because of sea level rise and oil pollution, of course, because oil pollution suffocates the mangrove trees. The mangrove trees are, I don't know if you know what the mangrove trees are. Well, there are others watching us, joining us online. The mangroves are, as they stand on still, the roots are above the ground, stand above the water. And so whenever there's high tide, when the low tide goes, the roots breathe. But when you have oil spill, it blocks the breathing, the pores on the roots. So the trees suffocate and die because of oil spills. So we're having also increasing ocean temperatures from global warming. And this is changing also the weather patterns, leading to more intense cyclones on the southeast border of coastlines of Africa, in South Africa, Mozambique, Tanzania, and the rest, experiencing more vicious cyclones. The impact of fisheries, warming oceans affect the fisheries, salinization affects the fisheries. Of course, sea level rise brings salt water into fresh water systems and affects the entire aquatic what's available in those communities. It also leads to displacement. Climate change is causing a lot of migration, both internal and external. When you lose your coastline, you lose your territory, lose your infrastructure, you're forced to move somewhere else. And you know, the Sahelian part of Africa is also experiencing a lot of desertification and also pushing people either up towards Europe or further down to other areas and to places where people are also being pushed from the coastline. So you have a very explosive and conflict situation in many parts of the world, especially in our continent. So climate change, you may not be able to say, well, this is the cause, it's this how it drives drives conflict, but it really brings a lot of instability. And in almost every case of conflict in the regions impacted by global warming, you can always trace back to this contributory factor. Recently, we did a research on climate change and conflict in coastal communities in West Africa, studying communities in Niger Delta, in Togo and Senegal, and it was the same story all over. So really, there's a very big link between global warming and conflict and peace in parts of the world. Now, this graph is very important because when I say we, I mean the general mindset is that the world is generally very reluctant, even the Conference of Parties of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, reluctant to phase out dependence on fossil fuels. The best we've achieved so far was at the last COP, when the world agreed to transit from fossil fuels for electricity, but not for other things. And so the industry remains on life support, and there's even more investment going to that sector. So, but if you look at this chart, you find that from the time of Christ, if you assume that that is 0 AD, approximately, up to only recently, less than 200 years, the world was not depending on fossil fuels for energy or for much. And this is going to end sooner than later. But people still tend to believe that it's going to last forever, that the world cannot think about when we're going to move away from fossil fuels. And this is what is burning, setting the world on fire. This is what is contaminating our environment. This is what is driving the whole plastic idea, plastic in our food, plastic in medicine, plastic in our clothes, plastic in fish. And recently people found plastic in human brains, microplastic. So we're actually becoming plastic humans. You think you are eating fish, you are eating plastic. Because there's so much plastic in the oceans. Seafood is really consuming a lot of plastic. So we have every reason to say, well, stop dependence on fossil fuels, keep the oil in the soil, and keep the coal in the hole. Now, the impacts of global warming, just show you some examples. What will happen to sub-Saharan Africa? About 20% of our land become unsuitable for agriculture by 2080. I know if I talk about 2030, politicians talk about 2080, they don't really care because they won't be around by that time. But there will be young people today who will be around then, and we should be worried about what will happen to them. Yeah, it's affecting the economic productivity. and more land is becoming arid. There are so many reasons to be worried. I took these photographs some years ago at Bodo in Ogoni. That guy used to be a fisherman, but now he sells firewood. He sells wood for people to use for domestic energy production. And really, it's not what he wants to do, but that's what. And the water itself is coated with crude oil. You can see it's not clean water. It's only recently they started cleaning up that area. Now, this slide just says one thing, that pollution is political. This man, the man you see there, Lawrence Sommer, in 1991 wrote a secret or private email that became public. You can find it online. And he said that underpopulated countries in Africa are vastly underpolluted. So it makes economic sense to dump toxic waste in those countries. So don't be surprised when waste sent to West are sent to Ghana, to Ivory Coast, to Nigeria, or else it makes political sense, economic sense. Think about that. And I'm coming towards the close of my presentation. We need global action to confront the system that is driving the kind of production, the kind of consumption, and the kind of destruction that we have in the world today. Nobody should feel, so pretend not to be concerned, because this is about life. One network I belong to, which was mentioned earlier, is Oilwatch International. We've looked at the negotiations in the climate negotiations in the world, and we find that it's not leading anywhere positive. One of the things we've been asking for was payment of climate debt, ecological debt or climate debt, because over the years, the level of extraction and destruction going on has to be compensated for. Somebody has to take responsibility and pay for it. And so there's no need to negotiate for climate finance. Give us 100 billion. 100 billion does nothing for the world faced on this kind of crisis. One flooding, one cyclone takes billions of dollars. In the US itself, one tornado, what do they call it? What do they call those? Hurricanes. One hurricane could wreak damage that's worth billions, several billions of dollars. So really, payment, recognition of the fact that there's an ecological debt being owed certain territories in the world, especially the global south, would make much better sense than talk about loss and damage. The loss and damage was agreed to at the last conference of parties in United Arab Emirates. It was a bold move after many years, 30 years of campaigning. Finally, we have loss and damage, but where's the money? The nation's contribution made only came out to $700 million, which not even up to 1 billion. In Copenhagen during COP15, there was an agreement to start contributing 10 billion per year up to 2020. From 2020 was going to be 100 billion. By 2020, they couldn't even raise, not in 1 year, raise up to 10 billion. It was only, I think, from last year that the world began to say, okay, we can, and a lot of the money is not additional, it's like loans and other things. So a lot of mathematics going on rather than doing the real thing. So demanding for ecological debt or climate debt, to me, is one key thing that we should concern ourselves with and focus on. But of course, the powerful nations have said they would not accept any sense of responsibility for the climate crisis. So you're going to take a lot of mind-bending arguments and negotiations to get that to change. And yes, so it's all about life. I saw this sticker in the common room at a church in Thunder Bay, and I thought it was really cool. Just to share with you that we have a common planet. I know there's a lot of investment about going to space, going to asteroids, going to Mars, but not a few people can make that trip. And it's not a very good option either. Just to show that, look, some people are ready to spend more money on outlandish ideas than to invest in taking care of restoring the planet to health, and thereby rebuilding resilience for communities who depend on the environment for their livelihoods. So this is all about life. It's not about power. It's not about capital. It's not about who controls what. It's not about who is dominating who. It's about understanding that we all have a common humanity and that we are human beings. You know, sometimes we don't want to see that being, human beings, we think that we are not beings at all. We are just human, but we are human beings because there are other beings. And those other beings equally have sensibilities. They have their languages, they have their culture, they have their communities. And when we disrupt their life, we're disrupting our own life. Because every single being is important for our survival. If you kill all the earthworms and all those small animals who burrow into the soil, and the soil dies out, then agriculture will die out. Kill all the bees through pesticides and herbicides, all the pollinators, and humans will not survive for much longer. So no matter how small or insignificant any being may look, we are all important. We are in the same boat. So I thank you for your attention, and we can have the conversation.
So I open the floor to questions both in the room and online. You can type your questions into the Q&A box or raise your hand, and I'd be happy to acknowledge you. But would someone like to start with a question in the room?
My question is, the issue about ecological debt is as controversial as the payment of reparation for slavery and coloniality. What is the prospect that this can be achieved in the future or in the near future? That is my first question. And secondly, climate change, even though IPCC and UNFCCC have provided abundant evidence that it is real, the impact is being felt. We can see climate change everywhere, changing weather, rising sea levels, but still we have some powerful politicians, industry players, framing the whole climate change as a horse, as something which is not realistic. With the Paris Agreement and Copenhagen and Kyoto Protocol and all that, still people are struggling to come to terms with the reality of climate change. What is the way forward?
You asked two difficult questions. So okay, so two questions, two very strong questions. Number one, about ecological debts being as controversial as reparation. Of course, this is the challenge of changing mindsets. And this is why the world is on the, would you believe that the world can be as violent as it is at the moment? At the kind of wars we're having, the powerful nations spend about more than $2 trillion every year on military armaments and warfare. And that has to be kept going because it's a big investment. So there are things that are difficult to change, but you know, just what we need to do and what the way forward to continue making the demands is both a realistic demand and also a political demand. Because at the end of the day, somebody has to come to terms with the harms done. And of course, people have to understand that we have only one planet that we, at least at now, that we know we can inhabit, you know, in a way that is that can accommodate everyone. And so it's a difficult debate, mainly also because of the persistence of coloniality. The colonial mindset is difficult to, it could end colonialism, but the mindset doesn't go quickly. So it's something that we need to remind ourselves more, have more group studies, community conversations, until the idea really gets to a point where policymakers begin to understand. Colonialism has not ended. Right now, the presidents of this world are like agents of transnational corporations. Who are the ones really running the world. Corporations are running the world. And so you got to get to a point where humans and people regain sovereignty over this kind of forces. But the concept needs more work, it needs a lot of work. There's been a lot of argument about how do you compute the value. I read some analysis as for ecological debt, we have $5 trillion a year, every year, for what has been done over the centuries. And I think that to me sounds responsible. The question would be, you know, there are many questions, so we need to keep on working on it. And let's know what is the right thing to do, and then build the pathways towards achieving that. the issue of climate change, of course, a lot of people have listened to scientists, some scientists who will tell you, well, the temperature increase is cyclical. It happened before many millions of years ago. It's going to get to pass. You know, they find a way to justify. If you go to the northeast of Nigeria, Lake Chad, there's a lake there that's been. Lake Chad is the second biggest inland water lake in Africa, and it's used by Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger Republic. But scientists also say that, well, Lake Chad has dried up before, almost finished. Right now, it's only 10% of the size it was in the 1960s. But some people are saying it's normal, that it's not global warming. But, you know, we know that it's not normal. Global warming is a contributor because the rate of recharge of water in the lake is not as much as the rate at which water is taken for irrigation and for other uses. So people will continue to those who deny climate change will always be there. And some of them, you know, are powerful people, especially right-wing politicians around the world. And of course, you know, in Africa, politicians are making very interesting assertions about why Africa should not stop extracting fossil fuels. It's so beautifully said. We have a right to develop using fossil fuels, whether the West likes it or not. Isn't that beautiful? I think it's a very powerful argument. But you know, that argument again can be negated if you look at is the fossils for fossil fuel being extracted in Africa, is it being utilized in Africa or for Africans? And the answer is no. Because about 87% of the natural gas infrastructure, for example, is all for export. The investment in the sector, up to 95%, is offshore, not on the continent. So it doesn't even have a backward integration to the economy. It doesn't affect the lives of the people. But it fits the politicians' fat. And the corporations are having crazy profits. Crazy profits. Anyway, pardon me for going around in cycles.
I've got a couple of questions online. One of them is going to come from one of our alumni, Matthias is there. Matthias, I'm going to allow you to turn on your microphone and ask your question when you're ready. Yes. Go ahead, Matthias.
Yeah, Jesse. Okay, thank you. And good afternoon, good morning. My name is Matthias. I'm happy to be part of this seminar. And for me, it's quite interesting listening to Prof. The fact that presently in Ghana, there is an ongoing conversation on what we call galamsey or illegal mining. For the past 3 months, the media, civil society, and other non-state actors have taken up the mantle to really push the government towards addressing the issues of illegal mining, because the impacts, as Prof raised, are multifaceted, looking at the effects on agriculture, looking at the effects on the ecology, water bodies, and other livelihoods, even including health, education, even the political space. So the impacts are wide. Recent studies show how illegal mining is contributing to the formation of children, newborn children, also increase in cancer amongst communities along where illegal mining activities are taking place. One of the demands of the civil society organizations is the call on government to place a state of emergency and also to ban small-scale mining. I want to hear from the perspective of Prof. whether these proposals by civil society organizations and other stakeholders for the government to place a ban on illegal mining and also state of emergency, whether these proposals are forthcoming, whether they are pragmatic and sustainable as far as the drive towards addressing illegal mining is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really good to hear from you about the Ghana situation. The galamsey situation in Ghana is really serious, and I'm happy that civil society is rising up to campaign on that issue and to make very clear demands. Galamsey, recently I was with a friend from Ghana and I was asking for the definition of galamsey. and he said it's a kind of broken, rotten English that actually was a way of saying gather to sell, right? Yeah,
I'm from Ghana, yeah.
Oh, good. Good. I'm happy to confirm that because I never knew what it meant until about 2 weeks ago we met in Bamako discussing issues around this matter. So, so it was done on a very minimal artisanal level. Right now you have international players. The Chinese are there doing local artisanal mining with machines, and they're mining even blasting very close to schools. So that apart from the pollution of the environment, it's damaging infrastructure. And it's getting so serious. And of course, politicians will be players in that system. And it reminds me of the level of oil theft in Nigeria. It's become very interactive. It's at industrial scale. But if you are not a part of the industry, you can't be a successful oil thief. Because you can't just break the pipeline that oil is passing up under high pressure and just put a bucket there. And the oil is sold by ocean-going vessels for export. So you have to have connections internationally. So you have to have security, you have to have political backing, you have to have industry expertise. And so that is almost what is happening in Ghana in terms of the galamsey. So I believe that the demands for a declaration of a state of emergency in the environment, state of environmental emergency is a very good demand, and they should add to that, ask the government to conduct environmental audits across the mining communities so that we can actually have a document showing what is the health impact on the people and on the biodiversity and the environment generally, so that people can really see that, look, this is unacceptable. In my presentation, I mentioned Bassey, which has the biggest underground gold mine in Ghana. And the whole place is like a disaster zone, the whole territory. And so those under whose feet these resources are extracted are the last to benefit, except to suffer the harms. Then whether the demands to stop, should they stop galamsey completely? Well, I believe that we should. I believe that it's the correct thing to do. It's also the same thing. When oil was found in Ghana, we campaigned very seriously with comrades there, friends there, that look, Ghana should not go forward with extracting, but now the impact on the fisheries is becoming real. So the country loses more of this kind of destructive extractivism going on. So yes, the demands are real. The politicians may not agree immediately to it, but for civil society to work with the communities to continually make this demand and hold politicians accountable as much as possible. They could also litigate where there are entities that can be held. They take them to court and let them be judicial decisions about the kind of harm that they are inflicting on the communities.
So thank you. There's another question here that I'm going to read from a person online, and then maybe we'll take another one in the room. It's from another alumnus of ours, Eduardo Costa, and he's written this question quite well, so I'm just going to read it as it is. Thank you, Dr. Bassey, for this great presentation. I am from the Brazilian Amazon region and have been studying similar processes of exploitation in the context of mining, timber, and energy industries in that part of Brazil. And you've started to go down this road a little bit, but he's refining this a little further. I would like to know your thoughts about the connections between local and global elites in terms of how they both benefit from these exploitation processes, and you've hinted at this a little bit, but also your thoughts on the role of corruption as a process connecting these local and global players. So I think he's asking what's going on, and maybe you have some recipe for it, something that we can do about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's both a comment and a question. And I do endorse the comment. Because, you know, what is happening in Latin America or South America is a whole lot of it is happening also in Africa and in Southeast Asia. So it's like a common thread running. There's corruption involved in this. And I like the way he brought it. Extractivism is not just about the mineral, it's also about extracting timber, destroying the forest. It's part of the extractivist ideas. Also extraction of labor. local labor being extracted, almost like taking the blood of the people and paying very little for it. So it always takes a collaboration between local elites and international players. That is why they can get away with murder. And in some countries, in the case of Brazil, it becomes very clear with the politics. You can see how when you have the kind of president, what happens on the thing of that person and the next. So it goes on. It's a direct correlation between the local elites and the global players, the transnational corporations, and it's all fueled by corruption and greed.
A question in the room? Roy.
All right, so with the issue of galamsey in Ghana, it is a great concern. So to follow up with the question or concern my colleague raised, asking whether the request from the civil society organizations pushing for a state of emergency. The concern is even when there is a state of emergency to it, there will be the need for it to be policed using the military to ensure that indeed it has been held or it has been temporarily suspended. But for some time back, we had the military partaking in this the whole process of clamping down galamsey, which was Operation Vanguard, and which there was what we call an investigative journalist had an expose where he showcased how some of the personnel, the military personnel, were involved in compromising the whole exercise. Aside the militarization of it, which has been compromised, the political nature of it, which is very polarized, where especially from the years 2007, 2008, where we've had successive governments trying to amass votes from the citizens. So you realize that every government comes to power and then his narrative towards illegal mining is different because they know very well that the mining communities have the force to bring them to power or to probably evict them out. Another part is also sometimes having the head of state, the president, who happens to be the spokesperson of some companies when it even comes up that these companies are involved in illegal mining. And you see the head of state, that's the president, mounting a podium and even defending the company. And talking about trying to take issues to court, even if the government goes against it. Now, the judicial system, it cannot also be trusted.
Right, we need a question.
Come in.
We need a question.
It's a comment.
It's a comment, and then I'll arrive at a point because it is a serious concern in Ghana. So this begs my question now. I wanted to give some substantive points to the question. This begs the question that even if the civil society organizations request of coming up with a state of emergency, how feasible would that be? And in the long term, because the government as a whole has the tools to see to it that this issue is curtailed. But here lies the case from the executive to even the lawmakers and back to the community, because they claim they are unemployed. If you want me to stop illegal mining, so looking at all these issues at stake, how feasible would the CSO's request to clamping down illegal mining take place or happen?
You're sounding very much as if you are speaking about Nigeria. I'm very sad to hear this analysis because it's so similar. You can't trust the judiciary, you can't trust the politicians, you can't trust the corporations. People are just left to themselves. And in fact, this is one reason why we need to make stronger demands, because the problem is so deep-seated. And the mindset has been so affected that people sometimes even believe that a harmful situation is okay for them. It's trauma that the communities have suffered. We see communities say we must continue with this thing, continue with galamsey, even they're getting from because they don't have jobs. It's because they're facing a trauma and they need to be healed. And this is one of the things that I believe civil society should engage in, healing territories, bringing hope, creating hope. That's a campaign of development and peace. And yeah, over the past 3 years, my organization has been focusing on healing territories as a major campaign philosophy, because we keep seeing people doing things that are unimaginable, and we know that it's not normal. It's because they are sick, and we are all sick. If you keep on seeing pollution, you become sick without even knowing it, because you need to see something that brings you joy. The human being is we are all social beings, and joy has a way of bringing about healing. When you see things that makes you hateful, makes you angry all the time, it's a big problem. It brings about a lot of sicknesses, some of which medical doctors may not be able to track. So in Nigeria, Galamsey, illegal mining. Have you ever heard of illegal refining of crude oil? In Nigeria, there's illegal refining. People are having illegal refineries in the bush, in the swamps. Very dangerous, very poisonous to the environment, poisonous to those who are doing it. The big guys stay in big fancy hotels in the city, and they pay people to do it for them, to burn crude oil, to refine crude oil. Even when the official refineries are not functioning, they are in the jungles that are producing petroleum products through illegal refineries. Some people say, well, it's our oil, it belongs to us. The same argument, but it's very destructive. So we need to, this is why when civil society demands for a state of environmental emergency, one of the first things to be done is to ask for an audit. If you have an audit, then the people will care to see how dangerous the situation is. They will come around that, look, they want to live, they don't want to die. In the oil belt of Nigeria, life expectancy is 41 years. Because of the poll, 41 years. Because national is 56, which is very low. But in Niger Delta is 41 years, which is horrible. And the same thing with the cancers and the birth defects. Ghana is going, the Galamsey communities are going towards that. It is something that is a critical thing. I don't think the civil society should back down because of these doubts and because of these challenges. If you back down, it dies there. If you persist on it, it may take a long time. When Ken Saro-Wiwa, have you heard of his name before? Ken Saro-Wiwa was a leader of the Ogoni people. He led the movement for the survival of Ogoni people. He was executed by the Nigerian government in 1995, 10th November 1995, for campaigning for justice. Now, what he asked for has now been validated. He didn't see the result in his lifetime, but now the cleanup of Ogoni land has started. And so we shouldn't be discouraged by making very strong demands. If we believe what Thomas Sankara said, you have to know what you are fighting, and then you have to fight with the conviction that you are right. Malcolm X said he was convicted of his own convictions. We need to have people standing up. I'm convinced that what I'm saying is the right thing to do. I'm not backing down. I'm pushing forward with it, whether you agree with me or not. Even if you're standing alone, one day a lot of people will come together. It may not be in our lifetime, but it's going to happen. But better if it happens in our lifetime.
Thank you very much. So we're going to bring the online portion to a close, and then we're going to continue the conversation in the room. So I'd like to thank everyone who joined us online, and apologies we weren't able to get to all the questions, and apologies we couldn't quite get the translation to work. So for those of you who are maybe had to work through in the English, we thank you for staying with us, and apologize for not being able to do that. But we'd like to just thank Nnimmo for his lecture and talk, and we'll bring the online portion to a close. So thank you, Nnimmo.